Welcome to Exit Paradox, where we explore what actually happens after a successful business exit. I'm your host, Anastasia Koroleva. Mike Brown's post-exit journey led him from chaos to clarity. But not right away. He had to go through a painful divorce, a business failure, financial losses, and emotional turmoil.
Pain is a great teacher. Unfortunately, as painful as that experience was, now I look at it as one of the greatest gifts of my life.
Today we're talking about what he's learned and why he decided to dedicate himself to coaching. Mike, I'd love you to walk me through step by step what happened to you in those first few weeks after the exit, how you felt, how you thought.
Yeah, I think that selling a company when we're young enough to enjoy it is one of the greatest gifts that we can give ourselves, because so many of us in society are in this trap of pleasure delaying and taking space, and we work our whole lives until we retire, and then most of us are too sick and too worn down to even enjoy it. And so, I can say that the day I sold my company was the single greatest night of sleep of my life, right? Because all this work, all of the years of blood, sweat, determination, all kind of culminated in that single moment. And um, in that, I think that there was a little bit of overexcitement and euphoria, and I truly thought I would never be unhappy again. Like I thought that I had finally I had done everything that society told me to do. Right, I built and sold an 8-figure company. I tested myself in combat. I worked hard in school. Like everything led up to that moment. And, society tells us if you just have enough money, you're going to be happy for the rest of your life. And I think I really believe that. And so after that initial wave of euphoria, then things started to get real, because not only did I sell my company, I also exited my first marriage at the same time. And so I was dealing with a lot of chaos, and so immediately my net worth gets halved, and now I'm a 50-50 co-parent, learning how to not be there for my kids every single night, and really at the same time this underlying anxiety of like, who am I without my company? And the thing that happens to post-exit founders is everybody starts saying, oh, I can't wait to see what you do next. And I'm like, next? Like, that was really hard. Like, I have to do something bigger and better now, just to stay on the treadmill, and that pressure was really, really intense. And I found myself putting a tremendous amount of pressure on myself to figure out something bigger and better, and really probably rushed into. And even though I knew that I wanted to take a break, and I knew that I was exhausted, I probably pushed myself a little too hard, a little too fast, given all the chaos that was happening.
Can we slow down here? Because I'm very interested in the connection between you building the business and your divorce.
Yeah. So when we, I think, I met my ex-wife when I was in my early 20s, when I was in the Navy, and the world at that point, I think, is very flat. Everyone has unlimited potential. Everyone, we're none of us are making money. We're just out of college, and so, the potential gap, I think, is not apparent. But as I became more and more successful, the chasm between the two of us just grew and grew. And for me, it was really, when I sold that company, I realized that there was a lot more out there for me in life, and that I wanted to become, really someone who, and there was a lot wrapped up into this. So I also started down the personal development train in 2017 with a mentor, Philip McKernan, who's been my longtime coach, and I've learned a tremendous amount from him. So I was really kind of going through this process of waking up and moving from type A, military, entrepreneur, Ironman triathlete to realizing there's a whole lot more out there than achievement. And the thing is like, I thought that reaching the pinnacle of achievement would make me happy, and I woke up and I was no different. So, okay,
Yeah.
now what? Like if all of these
Mm-hmm.
things that society told me was going to make me happy didn't, now what's out there for me?
Mm-hmm.
And as I started going down to
Yeah.
that path, it really upset the balance in the relationship,
Yeah.
because I think in many ways my ex-wife was very comfortable in that paradigm, and I was changing fast. And
Yeah.
when we go through that change, that stepping into personal development, that asking bigger questions, it can be quite destabilizing. And so, I can take ownership of the fact that yes, these were all positive moves, but I think probably from the outside, it would, my behavior could have looked erratic. It could have, I was asking big questions and seeking
Mm-hmm.
big answers, and that's quite destabilizing, both from a personal level, but also from a relationship level. So things
Yeah.
deteriorated pretty quickly.
Yeah. I lost my first marriage after an exit too. So I can very much relate to it. And it happens so often. People don't like talking about it. I'm sure you know lots of cases as well. But families often become the first victims of this whole post exit crisis, if you like. So, can I ask you, like, if you look back, do you think you should have done something different to protect your family? Or actually, you feel it was meant to be and it was, in a way, the good thing?
Yeah, this is a great question, and one that I've really sat with a lot ever since. And the reality is that I think we love, especially in Western culture, the idea of free will. But the more and more I've uncovered, I really actually feel uh, a pull toward deterministic outcomes, meaning that it happened in the only possible way that it could have. And for a long time, I carried a lot of
Hmm.
guilt because once it started unraveling, things happened really fast. And
Yeah.
I armchair quarterback and look back and say, woulda, coulda, shoulda. I could have taken things more smoothly. I could have let this thing
Hmm.
take a more natural course. But the reality is that once I made that shift, it was really on a collision course with reality, and there was no other way I could have acted in that moment. And I think that's something Brene Brown says, which is you were doing the best you could with the
Hmm.
information that you have. I can really look back and say, hey, I was in survival mode. I was in fight or flight mode, and even though
Yeah.
um, sure, things could have been smoother, the outcome would have been the exact same, and it happened the only way that it could have.
Okay.
And fortunately, I've been able to look back and take the lessons that I needed from that time, and really forgive
Hmm.
myself for not doing things smoothly. Because the reality is, life is messy, and
Yeah.
I had held it all together for 38 years at that point. And then, once the
Hmm.
dam broke, there was no keeping things together. There was no keeping up appearances. And there was a lot in that for me of learning to share my
Hmm.
messiness and just accept things as they are.
Yeah. Yeah. I completely understand that. And you moved on to the next stage of your life um, with those lessons. Okay, so let's move on and talk about what you tried to do while you were looking for that next big thing that could keep you busy. Because you mentioned you were under a lot of pressure from both inside and outside to find the next big thing.
Yeah. So, I had been a startup investor for many years. I really loved mentoring early stage founders. And so I thought coaching would be a natural extension of of that journey. And so, even before I sold, I started taking on clients here and there. And the reality is that I knew that coaching was my path, and that I had the capacity and the gifts to be a great coach. But
Hmm.
I got scared. I got scared of who I would have to become in order to step in and own that power. And I started feeling imposter syndrome, and I started falling into this idea that, well, if I bought and sold another company, then I would finally be worthy of telling other people what to do. Because I think
Yeah.
coaching is such an interesting path, because it's gonna be a
Mhm.
mirror and bring up all of your insecurities. because the
Mm-hmm.
whole idea of the fact that like who's qualified to give anybody else advice, unless you're a
Mm-hmm.
narcissist, is really prescient, I think, for people stepping into coaching. And so that was very real for me. And so I bought this distressed company really as a distraction for who I would have to become a great coach. I knew I would have to get better at boundary setting. I knew I would have to get better at protecting my energy. I knew I would have to build a personal brand and start stepping into the spotlight. And all of those things were so terrifying that it just seemed easier
Mm-hmm.
maybe to jump back in and build another company.
Oh wow, that's fascinating. So how soon did you realize that it was just an escape?
It's a great question. I mean, the way it went down is the two founders actually came on as clients. And at that time, my promise to clients was, hey, sign up for coaching. And then if I believe in your company, I'll invest in your company. Well, what that really
Mm-hmm.
was a way for me not to own my true value. My value was not financial. My value was in the wisdom that I'd earned over the years of building and exiting my own
Mm-hmm.
company and making all of the investments and mentoring founders. But again, I think there is a real hesitation to step in and say, hey, my value is actually not in my net worth. And so I offered that as a carrot
Mm-hmm.
to attract clients. The problem is it attracted the wrong kind of clients, right? It attracted clients that were desperate for
Oh
investment and
wow.
couldn't find it anywhere else. And it really blurred the boundaries, right? Because now I have a vested interest in seeing this person succeed. And the default mode was to just inject money to help them get where they want to go, rather than
Yeah.
actually hold the boundaries and help them become the
Mm-hmm.
best version of themselves, to step into their power to run their
Mm-hmm.
business. And so these guys came on as clients, and I immediately stroked a $200,000 check and realized that
Mm-hmm.
I was in way over my head. But rather than unwinding it and just taking the loss, I actually bought their company on the brink of bankruptcy.
Okay. But it could be a good financial decision. You think you just didn't make a good financial decision, or you think it has much more to do with what you were going through emotionally, transitioning into your new role or purpose, being a
Yeah,
coach?
I think very much both. I think there was two major forces at play. One was this kind of imposter syndrome for being a coach that I was talking about. The second is I had a really broken relationship to money. In my first business, we uh, entered. So I was an oil and gas investor and started that company in 2013, and it was the best time in the history of oil and gas to be in oil and gas. The entire Permian Basin was exploding with new growth based on horizontal drilling and fracking technology that were previously unlocking
Mhm.
reserves that weren't available before. And so a rising tide lifts all boats. And we were in the middle of a gold rush and made a lot of money very quickly. And
Mhm.
in doing so, we I think it's common knowledge that when we're building a company, when you're in startup mode, you wear all the hats, you burn the boats, you're always betting on yourself.
Mhm.
And then as you move into scale up, now you need to build new skill sets like
Right.
hiring and delegation and setting the vision and holding
Mhm.
accountability. And the same thing comes
Mhm.
we talk about building wealth. Is like you start as an accumulator of wealth, but eventually you need to
Yeah.
shift your mindset to being a defender of wealth. And I totally failed in that. I was deploying capital as rapidly as it came in. I had this very easy come, easy go, high risk, high reward type mentality. And once the
Mhm.
money for my company stopped rolling in, I just kept going in that default mode. And so, I had a lot of opportunities to learn the lesson, but unfortunately, I love learning the hard way. And really, it took a failed investment bringing me to my knees to recognize that my relationship with money was
Mhm.
broken.
Yeah, I remember reading that story of yours, and you mentioned that you were losing like 100,000 a month at some point on that investment.
Yeah, it was brutal. So, and you're right. Like, I don't want to discount my skills as an investor. It should have been a quick 12 to 18-month turnaround where I could have 5x my money.
Mhm.
And it looked on the surface like I just needed to clean up the balance sheet, eliminate some debt, restructure, slim down the team, and and build some efficiencies. And then, right after I closed, eh, there was a lot of e-commerce companies that were reliant on Facebook
Mhm.
as their primary acquisition channel, and this one was squarely in that camp. And the iOS 14 update came, and all of a sudden, we were getting 4.5 to 4 return on ad spend, and that got cut to 1 to 1.5 overnight. And so, revenue went from 350, 400K a month to 150K a month with the same ad spend. And so it spiraled out of control really quickly. And I knew really early on that this was a lost cause. Something I pride myself on is my ability to see and think in distributions of outcomes. I'm a natural handicapper. And so I think most
Mhm.
entrepreneurs have a burn the boats, put their head down, and they're going to succeed at all cost mentality. I think more like an investor where I just need to win 6 out of 10 times, right? I need to win more often than I lose, and I'm okay with cutting losers. But in this case, I had taken on investments from some of my friends, and I really didn't want to let
Mhm.
them down. And so I stayed a
Yeah.
whole lot longer than I should have. I should have cut immediately and
Yeah.
just faced the fact that this was never going to work in this new paradigm. But that's certainly
Mhm.
easier said than done, I think.
Did you feel you didn't quite have the skill to say no often enough at that time?
Absolutely. Yeah. There was also a deep sense of, because look, this default mode had always worked for me, right? I could get myself out of
Mhm.
any situation, and I had pushed myself to the brink many, many times, and always found a way at the ninth hour to pull a rabbit out of a hat and make things better. And that worked really well
Mhm.
for me until it didn't. And so, yeah, there was a
Yeah.
deep sense of responsibility to the company, to the team, to my investors. And even though I knew in my gut what the right answer was,
Mhm.
I
Mhm.
was unable to set that boundary. And that was really, when looking back, like that is the lesson that stands out the most for me. Is it forced me
Mhm.
to get really good at boundary setting. And as you know, as a coach, if you go too deep and have an emotional attachment to an outcome for a client, that can be really
Mhm.
exhausting and a total energetic drain, and it allows you not to show up for other clients, right? Or for
Yeah.
yourself.
Yeah.
And so it was really that experience that allowed me to become a much better coach and a much better human, because I really learned the ultimate lesson in
Mhm.
boundary setting.
Yeah. But I've now talked to hundreds of exited founders, and one of the most typical pattern is that people admit that they go down financially before they go up. We all tend to learn from our own mistakes as we're transitioning from a founder to an investor, and it sounds like you had to go through that as well.
And pain is a great teacher. Unfortunately,
Exactly.
as painful as that experience was, now I look at it as one of the greatest gifts of my life. And
Yeah.
I think
Yeah.
I carried a certain arrogance that only someone who's never lost could
Hmm.
have. And,
Yeah.
it taught me a lot about empathy, a lot about understanding that, like, hey, you can't always just pull yourself up by your bootstraps. You can't always just brute force your way out of any situation. And sometimes there are external forces beyond your control that you can't
Yeah.
look in the mirror and say, I can get out of this thing. And what a lesson, and what a gift.
Absolutely. I remember doing lots of angel investing early on after the first exit. And when those investments turned out to be bad decisions, that's when for the first time I started appreciating the difference between cash flow and the value of assets. And I would be curious to hear how you feel now about that.
Yeah, the thing is, I started angel investing almost immediately after I started making money in my
Okay.
company, and the reason I was doing that is because I thought that's what rich people did. We have such a hero
Right.
culture around venture capital and private equity, and even when we look at information out there about how ultra high net worth people structure their portfolios, their
Mhm.
alternatives tend to be the biggest allocation of their portfolio, 35 30%. And so I look at that
Mhm.
information, I go, okay, well, that must be the most important category. But what I failed to understand was
Yeah.
they had sequentially filled up their safety bucket first. So I was swinging for the fences
Yeah.
without ever putting on my own oxygen mask, and really resulted in disaster. But I think, I mean, I see so many founders going down this road is that, the minute they sell, they become an angel investor without building that
Yeah.
protective reserve. And
Yeah.
that's kind of why I stepped into what I'm doing now, is to help people shortcut
Mhm.
that pain and go, hey, you know what? If you build this protective
Yeah.
reserve, if you build cash flowing assets that cover your spending for the rest of your life, once you do
Mhm.
that, now with the next dollar, you can swing for the fences because your life and your legacy is protected forever. But if you start doing that
Mhm.
beforehand, you actually risk, having to start from zero. And I
Yeah.
very nearly had to do that.
Yeah. I find that what many of us miss, and I did as well after my exit, is that as much as we want to find that new purpose, as much as we miss being in the game and in action, if we don't take care of our finances and if we don't establish this safety financially, then actually most likely at some point we'll get so stressed that it will affect the quality of our decisions, and it will put our new venture, whatever it is, at a huge risk.
Yeah.
What do you think about
Yeah,
that?
I mean, that is a pattern I see play out over and over with the founders that I work with.
Mhm.
Is and it's a classic case of like what got you here won't get you there. Like we're used to betting on
Mhm.
ourselves. We're used to going all in and putting our backs against the wall. And for many of us is kind of a default state of being, right? Is when we look at people with a driven personality type, they either have D2, D4, or D2, D2 gene and high levels of neuropeptide Y.
Mhm.
And there's an excellent book by my friend Doug Brackman called Driven that kind of explains the neuroscience of high performance. And what happens when we have that driven personality type is that when we're in a situation that would send most people into fight or flight, we actually drop into calm in the chaos. And that's when we feel most alive. And that is a
Mhm.
really useful evolutionary adaptation, except for when we're safe. And when we're safe, what we do is we manufacture that chaos in order to elicit that high performance. So we get into this cycle of putting our back against the wall, right? Because it's when we feel most alive. And the reality is that
Mhm.
we are not wired for wealth, right? We're not wired for safety. We're not wired to build a protective reserve in order to swing for the fences. We go all in all the time, and so often it results in disaster.
So you basically think it's our role in the society, like entrepreneurs. Some people are entrepreneurs, other people do other things, but entrepreneurs are wired to not be safe.
Yeah, I mean, I think that right, I think we do a tremendous disservice to people by again building this hero culture around entrepreneurship, because the reality is it's not for everybody. Most people are not wired for the stress and the risk, and for most of us, for most founders, I think it's the only way we can operate, right? We're unemployable. We thrive on that
Yeah.
chaos, but that's just simply not the case for most people. And so, I mean, I really think it's kind of a process of natural selection. Is there was no other way for me to be other than betting on myself and being my own boss, and everything that comes
Yeah.
along with it. Right? Like I thrive in that chaos, and now my role, I view my evolution is how do I engineer just enough chaos to feel alive, but keep myself safe.
So I'd love us to talk about this. So you're basically saying that once you're wired for not having safety, we avoid safety. But we also need it to stabilize our life and to build some sort of normality, I assume, post exit. So, how did you create that balance or integration for your own life?
Yeah, I mean, very much as a product of this experience of having a financial windfall that should have set me for life, and then almost losing everything. I was forced to change, and the reality is that like we'll never make a change until the pain of staying the same is greater than the perceived pain of implementing that change. And for
Yeah.
me, I put my back so far against the wall that there was actually no way out other than to learn how to step into stability and create systems to keep myself safe. But one of the most important things I think is, the tendency is to overcorrect and go into a mode where I'm building systems for everything, and I'm trying to completely, you know, go against my programming and create all of this safety. And then at some point, our subconscious is going to take over, and we're going to self sabotage again. So what I
Yeah.
tell founders that I work with is you need a blow off valve, you need a release valve. So maybe put 90% of your
Mhm.
money into safe assets, but take 10% and still swing for the fences and invest in projects that you believe in, and take some of that risk so you have kind of an outlet, so that you're not taking the lion's
Mhm.
share and doing that same thing, right, where it's disastrous. So take some amount that you can lose and it's not going to affect you, and still find an outlet for that risk-taking nature.
Mhm. Okay, so what do you offer to your clients, or maybe what do you do yourself to create that stability and safety?
Yeah, I mean, the first thing is understanding how wealth actually works, and building an engine for stability. Because the reality is we think linearly, but that's not the way money works. That's not the way wealth works, right? Like it's a compound interest curve, and we have a really hard time understanding when we're on the flat part of the curve, because our brains are wired to perceive linear incremental progress. But if you can charge that wealth engine with a set of assets that pays for your lifestyle spending, now
Mhm.
you've created a compound interest vehicle that actually allows you to increase sovereignty as your wealth increases, right? Because money at the
Okay.
end of the day is only useful if it's uh, if it's used as a tool to generate the life that you want to live ultimately, right? And that can
Mhm.
be from an impact perspective, that can be from a purpose perspective, that can be from creating time freedom to spend experiences with the people that you love. But if we're not doing that, if we're just treating money as the end rather than the means, that's how we get trapped. And
Mhm.
so what I try to do is help people work backwards. And this is exactly the playbook that I did for myself. Is okay, what is the life
Mhm.
that I want to actually live? Who do I want to impact? Like what do I want to create here? You know, on with my time on Earth, and then I can
Mhm.
back into a decision making framework that allows me to use my wealth to build that actual life. And that's essentially creating a life of alignment. I want to align my values with my money in order to generate the life that I want to live. And that's the framework that I help people solve for.
So, what are some of the most effective exercises or maybe questions that you ask your clients that you see consistently help them break out of this problem of this natural resistance to safety?
Yeah, so one of the first things that I have people do is define what wealth actually means. Because if we're going to talk about building wealth, we need to have an exact definition. And it's like when I
Mhm.
host a retreat or a workshop, I'll ask for a collective definition of wealth. And it usually starts with something about money, but we end up with some definition that circles around freedom. So, what wealth means to me
Mhm.
is freedom in four areas: freedom of health,
Mhm.
freedom of relationships, freedom of time, and freedom of mind. And those go in ascending order. And once I've determined that wealth really is just increasing freedom, increasing sovereignty,
Mhm.
now my favorite question to ask is, where am I not free? And that is something I return
Mhm.
to over and over, is look at all areas of my life and go, where am I not free? Where am I still beholden to some relationship? Where am I still, beholden to giving up my time where I don't want to? And that's where we can start to work backwards to build that ideal vision.
Mhm. I love this. May I challenge you a bit?
Please.
So, I've been obsessed about freedom for most of my life, as I think every single entrepreneur out there. And then at some point, I realized that actually, when I did achieve all the freedom I could think about, what I really, really, really wanted was to limit that freedom and to commit to a purpose and have clarity and channel all that energy I had towards that purpose. And I had to admit to myself that I actually do not want to have unlimited freedom anymore. I want to have it limited by my own will. How would you think about that?
Yeah, I think that's exactly it, right? Is that, I think the first step is doing exactly what you said, is creating that unlimited freedom. And then you get to
Mm-hmm.
step into choice. Okay. If I have unlimited time, if I have the ability to sit in stillness, now what gets to start to emerge? And I think what most people find
Mm-hmm.
is ultimately it's not about you. And that was very much my journey, is that it felt
Mm-hmm.
really fun for a little while to live selfishly and just pursue things like adventure sports and spending time with my kids, and all of that stuff is really impactful. But then I started to
Mm-hmm.
feel this itch of like, hey, I've got something greater to give here. And the
Yeah.
minute I stopped making it about me and started making it about service and purpose, then you're right.
Mm-hmm.
I'm working harder than I've ever worked, including at my
Yeah.
first company right now, creating content, writing, coaching, and I
Mm-hmm.
love it. I'm obsessed. I'm obsessed with my craft.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
if you'd have told me 5 years ago that I would be working harder than ever, I would have laughed you out of the room,
Mm-hmm.
because I thought it was game over and I would never have to work again. But now it's
Yeah.
it's instead of a place from have to, it's I get to. And so
Mm-hmm.
I love having clients, and this is something I've done for a long time, is choosing a magic word for the year. So choosing a single word that will help you embody the life that you want to create. And for me, my word this year is purpose. And so every morning is like,
Yeah.
how can I live into my purpose? And you're
Yeah.
right, like when you're stepping into that service, now all of a sudden I've created constraints so that I can generate my highest and best self in order to live into that purpose.
So, how do you define purpose?
Yeah. For me, my purpose, at least right now. So I think it's really important is that, you know, a lot of times people go, "Hey, I'm going to be doing this for the rest of my life." That to me is really heavy. So I try to
Mm-hmm.
have as broad definitions and give myself the flexibility to change over time. But right now,
Mm-hmm.
my purpose is helping other people wake up to what's important,
Okay.
because I feel like the universe gave me that gift of this all of these experiences that resulted in realizing that I was chasing the wrong things. And so being able to give that gift to other people is my highest purpose, at least for right now.
Mm-hmm.
And so I really encourage people to have whatever purpose they feel is central, and hold it very
Mm-hmm.
loosely. And so I've tried to define it as broadly as possible. And so helping people wake up could mean in my work, but it also could mean with friends. It could mean with my family. It has a broad enough definition where I'm given the flexibility and adaptability to move and change as I grow, and my purpose can grow along with
Mm-hmm.
it.
Okay. I think that's wonderful, really inspiring. So, Mike, a few years ago, I thought that the biggest problem post exit is that so many people do not stop and take a break and think through things and do some introspection. And today, I'm actually thinking that the biggest problem is something else. It's the fact that many people stop and instead of taking a break, actually retire. Because when we retire, then we create this whole system of habits supporting our comfortable life. And it's extremely hard to break out of that and find that purpose, which you just so beautifully described, that inspires you, that gets you excited, that you're obsessing about. I'm curious if you came across clients who are having that problem, kind of being stuck in a golden cage and feeling their life is empty, even though their lifestyle is beautiful. And how do you guide these people out of that problem?
Yeah. So, like I mentioned earlier, I do think selling a company and sitting in stillness is really important, because the reality is when we look at that same driven personality type that leads us to be founders, a lot of times our edge is driven from darkness. It's driven
Mm-hmm.
from our past traumas. It's driven from pain that we are running from, and we're looking to fill that hole with external validation and success, and all the trappings that come with that. And so, I love the book Second Mountain by David Brooks, where our first mountain business is typically,
Yeah.
building from a place of lack, building from external validation, building
Yeah.
from trying to fill a hole that only you can fill. And
Mhm.
so, taking that space, I think, is really important, because a lot of us wear busyness like a badge of honor. And I hear a lot of times, founders say, "Oh, I could never sit still." And whenever I hear that, my question is, what are you trying not to feel? Right. And I can
Mhm.
tell you there was a lot of things in my life that I was trying not to feel by throwing myself at
Mhm.
work, by trying to
Mhm.
fill that hole with external validation. And so, having that time and that space to actually start to lean in and feel the things that I was maybe suppressing, or, anything from, PTSD that I was not willing to acknowledge, or,
Mhm.
this constant need to prove myself. Like, all of those things came front and center during that period of stillness. But you
Yeah.
have to lean in. I think you've nailed it, right? If you're just creating comfort, there's actually no
Mhm.
space to lean into those feelings that we've been suppressing for a long time. So, I recommend that everyone take some space, at least 6 months, but do the work.
Yeah.
Lean into the feelings, like figure out what it is that's driving you to never be able to sit still. And then on the backside of that, now let's start stepping into purpose. Now let's think about what building from light, what building from purpose can actually look like. And
Mhm.
I do think that there is a trap in just creating so much comfort that you're now just creating a new way of distracting yourself. It might have been your company before, and now maybe it's pleasure. And so I think you have to
Mhm.
do the work in association with sitting in stillness.
Yeah. Yeah. No, absolutely. I'm curious, how did you go through this journey of becoming less selfish? Because that is what we have to do to find purpose.
Yeah. Again, pain is a great teacher. And, I think it really started unwinding when I found that the pot of gold at the end of the rainbow wasn't what I thought it was going
Mhm.
to be. And that, no amount of achievement, no amount of trophies and Ironmans, no amount of proving myself in combat,
Mhm.
uh, no amount of money was ever going to fill this hole. And so, once I found that that was empty, okay, now what do I need to replace it? And so started asking those bigger questions, and super grateful to have a coach and mentor guiding me through that process. Going to
Mhm.
therapy, kind of doing engaging in all these different modalities that allow us to start
Mhm.
uncovering those bigger questions and start repatterning that edge from a place of lack to a place of purpose.
Mhm. Um, the therapy versus coaching. What did it give you, therapy comparing to coaching?
Yeah, I mean, look, I think therapy is a really useful tool in the toolkit, but I
Mhm.
recommend that people try multiple modalities, because while therapy is amazing for identifying and perhaps healing some of our childhood patterns, therapists are bound by guidelines, and
Mhm.
you could end up in a therapist office for years and not make any real progress because they don't have the ability to kind of drop the hammer. And that's where coaching was more effective for me, because
Mhm.
I think a great coach kind of wears both hats. They can ask really good questions and help you understand your patterns and gain some insight as to where they came from. But at some point, they can go, "Hey, you're full of shit. Stop it." Like, and really, push a lot harder. And I think for high performers, that can be really valuable as long as it's wielded with intention.
Yeah. I have to say, for me, the very idea of going back and relieving the trauma and finding what was wrong in our childhood, for me, that never worked. I actually think um, sometimes it's better to focus on something much bigger, much more important, that you care so much more about, that this trauma may just dissolve because it will be small in comparison.
Yeah, I
I'm
think
curious what.
that's totally valid, and I can tell you, recently I've had one of my most significant breakthroughs since starting this work a decade ago, and
Mhm.
essentially what I found was, I would be in coaching retreats or in the therapist office, and normally we do memory association. We go back to childhood memories that are particularly painful. And I would be accessing these memories of, my mom yelling at me or being made fun of by kids or whatever it is. And I would see other people in the room getting really emotional as they access of these memories. And, when I was honest with myself, I was like, yeah, I mean, that was painful. It wasn't a pleasant experience, but I didn't have this deep
Mhm.
ocean of pain that a lot of other people seem to experience. And there was a point where I kind of started giving up or thinking like
Mhm.
maybe I'm just not wired to feel that kind of emotion or whatever. What I actually found
Yeah.
was that you know my pattern was created by a much more meta trauma, which is kind of
Mhm.
when I was in first grade, my parents got called in the principal's office and they said, "Hey, your son just took his first achievement test or IQ test or whatever it was, and he tested off the charts. And we're not going to tell him." I actually didn't find this out until I was 30 years old, but I had a
Wow.
distinct sense of kind of permanent othering because I knew things that
Mhm.
other people my age didn't know. I was
Mhm.
able to intuit things or just have answers that other people had to work through or study for, and kind
Mhm.
of sort of like how there's very little sympathy for post exit founders. There's very little sympathy for people who are considered gifted, and while that giftedness, that intelligence is a massive advantage, it can also be a burden.
Mhm.
And so as I've found this kind of permanent state of rejection and aloneness because I wasn't able to really connect with my peers or be
Mhm.
seen for who I truly am, I started this process of chameleoning. I would meet people where they are. I would modulate my answers. I would always try to
Mhm.
be fitting in, and I didn't realize kind of the pain or the deep ocean of sadness that was associated there. So for me, finding that emotion was really finding this meta permanent state rather than event based traumas, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. Do you think your parents made the right decision by not telling you about that test?
I think that's really hard to parse out. Again, I think they were doing the best they could with the information they had. That was the recommendation they got from the school. So, I think they were just following whatever protocol they thought was necessary. Um, and I'm not sure what I would have done with that information early on. Uh,
Yeah.
so I'm not sure if it would have made any kind of a difference. But now I think we see a lot more a huge rise in helping kids navigate neurodivergence and whether that be giftedness, whether that be Asperger's, or like whatever, however that manifests for them. And so
Mhm.
I think having access to more modern tools or support for this thing that was again, while a gift, it was also very othering, and I didn't understand why. So I think
Yeah.
that fast forwarding 40 years now to I think we've taken a massive step in the right direction in giving support for neurodivergent children.
How do you go about this with your own kids? Like, do you encourage them, for example, to be entrepreneurs? Do you encourage them to be different?
Yeah, I mean, this goes back to what I was saying is that I think we do people a disservice, and I hear so many founders and entrepreneurs going like, "Oh, how do I teach my kids to be entrepreneurs?" And
Mhm.
I think entrepreneurship selects you. I think that it's probably inherent with personality types, and so I don't encourage my kids to be entrepreneurs. I actually encourage them to figure out whatever their own path is, and
Mhm.
I want to give them the tools. I want to give them the access. I want to teach them about entrepreneurship. So, I'll have conversations with my son and be like, "Hey, do you see any other kids driving to school in a Lamborghini? No? Okay, well, let's talk about how that happened. Let's talk about why, what I had to do in order to reach
Mhm.
this kind of life." And then we talk about whether that
Mhm.
feels like a fit for him or not. And we had a great
Yeah.
conversation recently. I was like, "Hey, do you think you would rather work for yourself or work for a big company?" And he was like, "Oh, I think I'd rather work for a big company." I'm like, "Great. Like
Oh,
that's
really?
really good to know because if I try to force you into this box of entrepreneurship, you're going to be fundamentally unhappy because your personality doesn't actually fit that."
Mhm. But you still model that behavior to your kids, probably especially to your son.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah, certainly. And I
whether you
really
like it or
view
not.
go ahead.
I know whether you like it or not, your son will be looking at you as a model.
Yeah. And this is I think critically important. It's a distinction that I don't think a lot of parents get is, you know, kids pick up on what you do, not what you say. You can speak
Yeah.
at them all day long, but they're actually just going to learn modeled behaviors. And so
Hmm.
what can I do to prepare my kids is live my best life possibly and stand in my truth and show
Hmm.
them that I am living into my purpose and living into my values. I can model a good relationship, right? So I can
Hmm.
tell them what a good relationship looks like, or I can just show them. And what I view my role as a parent is actually helping them create their own sovereignty. So my first principles as a parent is that my children are sovereign beings. They actually know what's best for them. They have their own internal wisdom, and my job is just to set the boundaries and help them ask really good questions so that they can unlock what's already inherent within them.
How old are they now?
My son is 12 and my daughter is 7, and she's a little wrecking ball. She's a little mini me.
Because I have to say that I clearly see the pattern that many successful entrepreneurs, those I talk to who exited their companies, their parents are or were entrepreneurs as well. So I think that modeling clearly works.
Yeah, that's interesting. I would have to sit with that because I actually feel like a lot of my peers and founders that I talk to a lot of times came from nothing or came from parents that worked government jobs or teaching jobs or whatever, and their drive was to create a better life for themselves. And so that's a really interesting distinction. But
Yeah, be, because what I notice now is that those who achieved this highest level of success and actually sold their companies successfully, more often than not, have parents who were entrepreneurs. That's just my observation. I don't have enough statistics to support that.
yeah, I mean, and I think that could totally be true, and I think it probably depends, right? Like you're talking to a lot of multi nine, 10-figure founders, and I'm probably playing in more of a different pond of more the 5 to 50 million type folks, and so I wouldn't be surprised if there's correlation between the highest levels of success. As we know, it gets really pointy at the top. So I wouldn't be surprised if more multi nine type figure founders had entrepreneurial parents,
Mhm.
and that'd be a really interesting study to actually get data on. I'm sure.
Yeah. Oh, what about your parents?
Yeah. So I grew up in a very wealthy town, Midland, Texas, which is the second highest income per capita after Greenwich, Connecticut, and it's due to the oil and gas
Mhm.
industry. So I had a lot of wealthy
Mhm.
friends, but my parents were not wealthy. My dad was an engineer for a very large oil company, and in the 80s and 90s, the oil business was not the same as it is now, and so uh, we had 5 kids, and money was a struggle my entire life. I mean, I grew up watching my parents fight every night about money, and
Mhm.
my dad is an incredible engineer, but he is very much not
Mhm.
an entrepreneur. He is very risk
Mhm.
averse, and he would rather be uh, nosing into spreadsheets all day long than going out and taking risks. And so I knew very early that I was much different than my dad. That was,
Okay.
and for a long time, I probably thought, I probably didn't understand why he was so risk averse. But now again, that I don't view entrepreneurship as better than. I view it kind of as a necessary evolution for those of us with this certain personality type. I can really see why that would have, completely been a disaster for him. And I got to learn so much. I mean, my dad is one of the sweetest men that I've ever met in my entire life. And so I hold a lot of respect for people who aren't wired for risk the way that we are.
Mhm. But do you think that the fact that you were poorer than your friends when you were a child uh, created a chip on your shoulder, which later pushed you to become ambitious about earning money?
I mean, no question, right? Like I think all of these things contribute to the drive. I think, being on the lower middle class end of things in a very wealthy town definitely was a driver. But even more so, I think it was watching my parents fight about money. I mean, I can remember saying to myself as a very young child, like, I'm going to have so much money when I grow up that I'm never going to have to fight with my spouse. And I think
Yeah.
that was really the core driver. And yes, I think the
Mhm.
societal layer on top of that with my childhood friends was a part of that. But I think it was even more
Mhm.
acute for me based on the dynamic I saw in my family.
So it was nature and nurture then, in your case,
Yeah, and
that
and my mom,
led you to become an entrepreneur.
yeah, and my mom was an incredible mother who pushed us really, really hard. With 5 kids in the family,
Mhm.
uh,
Yeah.
my kind of core story was that achievement equals love. Like if I wanted to get attention at the dinner table, I better have gotten an A on a
Mhm.
test or won my swim meet or scored a touchdown or whatever it is. And because that was just how we
Mhm.
competed for attention in the family. And so she
Mhm.
raised 5 very competitive children. And again, that's a really great core wound to have, is that achievement equals love, because it kind of sets the stage for success as a driver. But, if
Mhm.
not uncovered and healed, at some point it becomes a limitation. And that's kind of the path that I went on.
Brilliant. So, Mike, going back to your coaching business right now, if a recently exited entrepreneur came to you and asked, what should I avoid? What are the traps? What are the dangers? What I should not do within the first 2, 3 years post exit, at least? What would you say?
Yeah. First and foremost is, from a financial standpoint, build a protective reserve. Whether that's, whether you want to hire a wealth manager or self manage, make sure that. So the concept I teach is called escape velocity, which is essentially, that point where your assets pay for your spending without ever drawing down on the principal. So first and foremost,
Mhm.
do that. Before you make any investments, before you're investing in your buddy's startup, before you're buying crypto or whatever, whatever
Mhm.
wild entrepreneurial proclivities you have, like, take care of the protective reserve first. And then the
Yeah.
second thing I would say is give yourself the gift of stillness. But like we said earlier, do the work. Like, go to therapy, hire a
Mhm.
coach, like, figure out what it is that makes you tick.
Mhm.
And and I think the mistake that we make, a lot of people come to me and they go, well, yeah, but what if I lose my edge? And my answer is, like,
Yeah.
if your edge is driven by darkness, you may lose your edge, but there is so much for you in building and honing a new edge from a place of wholeness. And
Mhm.
so, don't jump into something so fast. Like, don't get into the trap of biggering and biggering. Like, take some time, take some space to heal, see what comes up
Mhm.
for you in the absence of busyness. Like, force yourself to read fiction books, force yourself to go on walks
Mhm.
with no point, right? Like, because the other thing
Mhm.
is if we're not building a business, we might jump into a new sport or a new hobby and then throw ourselves into it just as voraciously as we do to business building. And I
Yeah.
actually, tell people, like, hey, take some idle time, like, try and do a hobby with no intention of getting good, and see
Mhm.
what comes up in that space. And that's when the real work begins.
Are you doing this to break the pattern, the habit of achieving? Is that the reason?
Yeah. And um, what I would say is that the point is actually not to break our patterns, but it's to become a choice. So,
Mhm.
achieving is a really useful pattern, but not if it's our default subconscious state. right? So I want to say, hey,
Mhm.
when can I put on this achievement based hat? When is it useful? But also when is it not?
Mhm.
So it's really identifying how can I step out of this as a default mode into an at choice mode, and I think that really is the thing, because I still want to keep my drive. I still want to keep my discipline. Like I want to keep all of those things that made me successful. I just don't want to be doing it
Mhm.
unconsciously.
Mhm. But how do you master this control? That's this switch of achievement mode.
Yeah, I mean it's I think it's kind of the fundamental process of self-actualization
Mhm.
is understanding that control is an illusion, and that no matter how hard we try, we actually have way less control that we think. And you know, every time I find a new layer and step into where am I trying to control, or it's kind of a corollary to where am I not free. Where am I not free is usually a place I'm trying to control.
Mhm.
And so, what
Mhm.
does it look like to have, understand that, like, hey, I know where I want to go, or I know what I think I can become, but let me hold that very loosely and allow the pattern to emerge rather than trying to force outcomes. And every time that I find myself out of alignment, it's probably because I'm trying to force or control an outcome versus setting
Mhm.
the conditions and then allowing that outcome to naturally emerge as it will. And when we step into
Mhm.
that, so often the outcome is so much greater and so much more beautiful than we could have possibly imagined, because you know
Yeah.
ultimately our imagination is such a limiter, right? Because when I think
Mhm.
about the greatest things in my life, all of them are beyond my wildest dreams. And so how can I
Mhm.
foster the environment for my wildest dreams that I couldn't even imagine to come true?
Do you think it's still useful to set up long-term goals, like a 10-year-old big, hairy, audacious goal?
I totally do. So I'll name mine for you, which is, I see a future where I am a multi-time best-selling author. I'm speaking on the biggest stages in the world, and I'm impacting, people at a really massive level. But I have no
Mhm.
idea exactly what that path is going to look like. I have some ideas. Like I'm working really hard on writing my first book right now. It's going to come out in the fall.
Mhm.
I'm working on creating content. So it's okay. What daily conditions, what daily, weekly, monthly conditions need to be true in order to allow for that outcome or make that outcome inevitable? And if I can just
Mhm.
engage in those, now the path is going to take whatever path it takes, but I know that I will
Mhm.
eventually get there. It's just a lot less structured than maybe it would have been 10 years ago for me.
So when we sell our companies, one of the biggest challenges is that we no longer have a structure. We no longer have those people we delegate to, who do what we ask them to do. How would you advise people to go about it and create an alternative structure in their lives without a company?
Yeah, I think a couple things. One is I recommend, as long as the exit is significant enough, I recommend keeping two employees. One is an assistant, and two is a house manager. So I
Mhm.
think my house manager Sarah is my most valuable employee, and
Mhm.
essentially, when we hired her, I said, "Hey, look, we're two busy, fun-loving CEOs that want to spend more time with our kids. So I want to outsource all of the daily tasks that take time away from my kids and being present." And that is such a force multiplier, because now I'm not doing things like, you know, cooking, doing laundry, going to the store, like all of the things that kind of take up a lot of space in our life. And so, you know, if a post exit founder has the means, I highly recommend keeping some, keeping a personal assistant or a VA or a house manager. And,
Mhm.
with that, uh, I think that rules are made to be broken, right? Like, I think we need to go break all the rules. I think we need to go into an unstructured period to then say, okay,
Mhm.
what structure is serving me and what structure doesn't, right? Like, I don't want to place a
Mhm.
bunch of obligations. Like, I don't want to join a bunch of boards where I have to show up for meetings. Like, I want some
Mhm.
unstructured time to then decide, okay, which structures actually serve me. So for me, it's health and fitness is a structure that is
Mhm.
really important, right? If I start getting away from my workouts or some of my other health practices, like that's going to put me in a bad spot. So I'm going to keep that structure. But, feeling
Mhm.
obligated to, attend whatever meetings or events or like that stuff actually doesn't serve me. I don't want to be beholden. I don't want my time to be beholden to things that I'm not really passionate about. So I want to get rid of that structure. So it's really, going into a period of unstructured activity and then finding where to build in a way that serves who you want to become.
That leads us to a question which, for many post exit founders, is particularly painful early on, which is identity. How do you think, what is the most helpful and healthy way to answer the question, what do you do after an exit?
Yeah, I mean, I think probably the most fundamental question that a post exit founder has to answer is who am I without my company? And a level
Mm-hmm.
below that is who am I without my achievements? Who am I without my success? And that can get really, really uncomfortable, but that's where the beauty lies, right? Is when you
Mm-hmm.
strip away all of the achievements, all of the money, all of the, whatever, um, who are you at a core? Like who do my kids know me to be? Who does my
Mm-hmm.
partner know me to be? And then you can start uncovering who am I to me, right? And I know that's sort of an esoteric question, but I think there's so much in there. Is ultimately, like, am I still lovable if I'm not building things or achieving things? And that's something that a lot of founders wrestle with.
Yeah, absolutely. So, what are your biggest lessons with respect to relationships after your divorce and your whole transformation into a coach?
Yeah, I've found myself so incredibly fortunate in that I met a new partner, um, not long after my divorce, who was a fellow founder, and she had been building a digital marketing agency for many years, and this was someone who is a true equal in every sense of the word, and we've been able to develop a relationship where 1 plus 1 is greater than 2. And
Yeah.
for me, that distinction actually came when I was at my lowest point during that failed e-commerce company. There was days I didn't even want to get out of bed in the morning, and a good partner, I think, would have come in and said, "Hey, buddy, like you got this, you can do it. Like get up, we can go do this." And she actually said, "Hey, stay in bed. I'll take your meetings. I'll run your company." And whoa, like what a crazy relief and experience that I had never had, because I think when we are incredibly capable, we tend to, again, back to control, like we control all of the outcomes, and if I'm not okay, nobody else is going to be okay. And to go into a place where, hey, I actually cannot be okay, and someone's got my back, and someone capable can actually hold this space for me to be a mess. What an incredible gift. So I just am, I have such deep gratitude for being able to build this relationship. And I think it's a gift. Uh, I think that, we grow and evolve. And there's a really great podcast with Esther Perel on Huberman that talks about, we have multiple relationships in our lifetime, and if we're lucky, those relationships can be with the same person. I was not so lucky, and now I get to build this second mountain relationship, and I think, I get to use all of the learnings and tools that I have access to now that I didn't before. And the reality is that, relationships take intentionality, and there's your relationship with yourself, and there is your partner's relationship with themselves, and then there's this third entity, the relationship between the two of you. And people say relationship takes work. I don't love the word work, but I would say tending to, right? And like, we have to be intentional with how we build this thing, or it's going to get out of hand, because the reality is that, as we go through life, little micro resentments build up that create a chasm. And so if we're not working to constantly heal those and come back together and pour intention into that relationship, I think any relationship is going to deteriorate over time without that.
Absolutely. And I wonder, if you guys work so well together, are you thinking of actually working together, doing something as work partners as well, sharing your purpose, or you prefer to separate these things?
We've tried many variations. So, she was my CMO for both my previous company, and now she's my CMO for my new company. I'm the CFO for her company. So, we both have a deep role in each other's companies. But there was actually a
Mhm,
period of time where, you know, in between companies, I was like, "Oh, I'm going to work for you. I'll be your number two." And it turns out I really am
mhm.
unemployable. And even though it was my wife, there was no way that that was going to work. And so now we found
Mhm.
a really mutually beneficial way to work with each other, where we help each other grow and build, but we're not so intricately involved in each other's companies that
Yeah.
we're getting in each other's way.
You found your balance. That sounds great. Mike, is there something that we haven't discussed but you feel you would love to share with an audience of exited founders?
I mean, you were so good at asking great questions. This is hands
Thank
down one of the
you.
deepest interviews I've done, and I'm so grateful for the opportunity. Uh, but I would say the biggest thing is something I have already shared, but I would just love to reiterate and really leave the
Mhm,
audience with, which is give yourself that gift of stillness, and in that stillness,
mhm.
lean into figuring out who you truly are without achievement, because I think that is really the key to then being able to build something uh, from purpose, something that's bigger than
Mhm,
yourself. And I
mhm.
can tell you, the view from here is remarkable. Like waking up every day, like, do I want to post on social media every single day? Like, of course not. But if I can take myself out of my ego and say, you know what, this is not for me. Like, there is somebody out there that needs to
Mhm,
hear this wisdom and this journey, and I've earned
mhm,
that. I've earned the right because of
mhm,
the
mhm,
pain and suffering that I went through. And if I can step out
mhm.
of myself into service, like, it's such a gift. And so, really, just take that stillness and see what's there for you.
It is definitely worth it. I agree with you. I've gone through a similar journey, and I would love people to not miss this opportunity and find what they truly are about and why they are on this planet in the first place. So, Mike, my last question, it's the same question I ask everybody else. How do you want to be remembered?
You know, I think there's a big difference in impact and legacy. And legacy is what happens after you die. For me, legacy is heavy. Um, I really am. I hope I'm remembered by my children as a great dad. Uh,
Mhm,
but other than them, I really don't care who am I remembered by. I care about who I can
mhm.
impact while I'm here.
Yeah.
And so I just try to focus on everything on present rather than putting my name on the side of a building when I'm gone.
Mhm,
And that's
mhm.
what keeps me driven. That's what keeps me getting up every day, is how can I impact people in the present rather than worrying about some future where I'm not even around to enjoy it.
Awesome. Mike, thank you so much. So much wisdom. Absolutely brilliant. You've given us so much value. I'm really, really grateful for that.
Yeah, well, I really appreciate the opportunity to jam with you. Like I said, you ask amazing questions, and I really appreciate the work that you're putting into the world.
Thank you so much.